Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 20th of March of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Middle East, and telling the truth, I believe, and this is just my opinion, you think differently, I believe that something bad is going to happen in the Middle East within the next 10 or 20 days. So as for me, as according to my understanding of the situation, I'm probably speculating, and these are just my projections and so on. I believe that the ground operation is inevitable, and as I understand, the United States of America will try to unblock the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz using their own forces, but I think that this operation, that the United States of America will carry out this operation with a coalition of the United Arab Emirates. Most likely they will take part in this coalition. Most likely we'll see Israeli air forces, and it seems that the Ukrainians are also going to join the US coalition. Probably sounds funny, but I will explain you what exactly the Ukrainians are going to do with this ground operation, and this is the most dangerous part of this ground operation. So now let's discuss everything in details. Once again, the ground operation, it seems to be inevitable, and most likely this ground operation will start within the next 20 days or something like this. Just yesterday we discussed that the US forces were already spotted transiting the Strait of Malacca. We are talking about the 11th Marine Expeditionary Group unit. We are talking about the US Tripoli, an American-class amphibious assault ship. We are talking about the New Orleans, a San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock, and they were spotted probably within 9 days before they enter the area of the Middle East conflict. So this is the first group that will arrive very soon, and most likely they will be the first part of this operation, or they will prepare the ground before more forces arrive in this area. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, we received the report that the United States of America is sending another group from San Diego, and this time we're talking about the 11th Marine Expeditionary Group. The American military is accelerating the deployment of thousands of Marines and sailors to the Middle East amid tensions with Iran, reports Newsmax. A group of ships, the US Boxer and the 11th Marine Expeditionary Group, are departing earlier, transporting about 4,000 troops with aircraft, missiles and assault vehicles. They will join other ships, including the US Tripoli. The US Tripoli is carrying the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. So this means that in coming days, in coming months, we'll see up to 6 or maybe more thousands of US troops in the area of the Middle East, and then everything will begin. So the problem is not the problem, but the thing is what kind of targets the United States of America is going to take under control with the purpose to block the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Of course, everybody understand that first of all we are talking about the island of Hark, the most important island for the Iranians. Trump is considering seizing or blocking Iran's Hark Island to force reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, but not decision yet. He wants Hormuz open. If he has to take Hark Island, that's going to happen. So this is the first target for the United States of America. The second target is this island, the island by the name of Qashm Island, the island of Larak, and the island of Hormuz. So there are 3 more islands that are located to the north of the United Arab Emirates. Most likely the United States of America will try to take these islands also under complete control. And today we'll start receiving first pictures. In here we can see a US strike hit Iranian tunnel complex on Qashm Island, causing visible surface damage, but failed to destroy or penetrate the hardened underground tunnels, meaning key assets likely survived. So the United States of America began bombing and attacking this territory with the purpose to prepare this, let's say, island and this foothold before the beginning of the ground operation. Furthermore, we start receiving updates on bombardments of facilities and military infrastructure around the settlement of Bandar el-Ngeth, which is located further to the southwest of this island and to the southwest from the city of Bandar Abbas. So the United States of America will try to take these settlements under complete control. So, and in the beginning of this video, I told you that most likely the Ukrainians will take part in this operation. Currently, the Ukrainians are saying that they're going just to show what can they do with the Iranian drones for the United Arab Emirates, for Oman, for these all Middle East states, with the purpose then to sell their project, to sell their weapons, and to earn a lot of money. So, this is the tasks of Ukrainian side that are located on the surface that we can see right now with our eyes without any problems. But when talking about the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, there is another probably important object of infrastructure. There are many of them, of course, but there are two more very important ones. The first and the most important is the largest gas field in this area. I would like to remind you that several days ago, according to information we have, the coalition attacked the city of Nakhel Tahi, this one, and here, according to information we have, Iranians have the largest gas field, South Parth, and this gas field was attacked by the Israeli forces. The President of the United States of America told us that he knew nothing about this. But now it doesn't matter. As you can see, this biggest gas field is located also along the Persian Gulf, which means that this territory could be also a target for the coalition. They will try to take this territory into complete control, to establish complete control over these facilities, to control them, and then probably to dictate their demands, the coalition's demands to the Iranians. And so we have discussed three important targets, but there is a fourth important target, probably the most important target than all of these, and we are talking about the city of Bushehr. The city of Bushehr is located in the southwestern part of Iran, in the vicinity of the Khark Island, and when talking about this city, we have the Bushehr nuclear power station. So Bushehr nuclear power plant is located to the southeast of the city of Bushehr. So this is this nuclear power station, and I would like to remind you that this nuclear power station is under construction. One reactor, the Russians finished the building of construction of one reactor, and there are two more reactors the Russians are planning to finish building, and the sources are saying that according to different sources this year the Russians were planning to finish the construction of the second reactor of this Bushehr nuclear power plant. And obviously this is a very tasty target for the coalition and probably for the United States of America. And if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of the conflict, according to information we have, there are still around 480 Russian citizens at the Bushehr nuclear power plant. So a strike since the beginning of conflict, there were several strikes in this area. A strike on the territory adjacent to the meteorological service at the Bushehr nuclear power plant was carried out near an active power unit that was stated on the 18th of March, so several days ago. Preparations are underway for the third evacuation of personnel from the Bushehr nuclear power plant. There are no casualties among the staff of the Russian company, state corporation, and so there are still Russian people in this area. So there are still, and most likely the Russians will not leave this territory, because first of all, these are Russian investments, and the Russians are constructing this power station. Of course, this is the most important asset, because any power station is something like the strongest stronghold ever. And for example, if the coalition is able to take this power station under complete control, then the Iranians will start suffering huge problems in the negotiation process, because this is a very, very important point. So what is the relation and connections of Ukrainians to this situation? To understand who is going to take this nuclear power plant under control when there are Russians, probably it's better to understand what is happening right now on the territory of the Russian Federation. Today, the Russians adopted a very important law, and for some reason they adopted this law right before the beginning of the ground operation from the United States of America. According to this new law, the Russian armed forces will be able to invade any countries at the president's decision to protect Russians. So this is the most important thing. Such a bill was introduced by the governments to the State Duma. The pretext could be the arrest or persecution of citizens based on the decisions of foreign and international courts or something like this. The Commission on Legislative Activities has already approved the initiative on March 10th. So now the Russians can protect Russians everywhere. And as we discussed just a minute ago, according to information we have, there are around 500 Russians on the territory of Bushehr nuclear power plant. And as we can see, despite the fact that the clashes are taking place around this area, the Russians are not leaving this territory. You know that some experts said that maybe even the Iranian, let's say uranium, this uranium that the President of the United States of America wants to take, maybe is located on the territory of this nuclear power plant under the protection of the Russian civilians. According to now, there are civilians. So that is why and if you remember, several days ago there was a proposal from the President of the Russian Federation that Russians will take this, let's say, uranium to the territory of the Russian Federation, but the United States of America rejected that idea. But the main problem is that the United States of America most likely will not escalate the conflict with the Russians, and they will not, let's say, carry out a military operation in this area. And this is the part when the Ukrainians are entering the game. According to Zelensky, since the beginning of the conflict on the territory of the Middle East, Ukraine has deployed up to 228 Ukrainian specialists in this area. So we are talking about FPV drone operators, but it seems that Ukrainians have deployed more forces in this region. So most likely, if something is going to happen with this nuclear power plant, most likely this situation will be carried out using Ukrainians, because you know that there is another important nuclear power station in the world where we can see tensions between Ukrainians and the Russians, and of course we are talking about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. I would like to remind you that Ukrainians Zelensky himself wants this nuclear power plant to be returned to Ukraine under their legislation. But the Russians are saying that this power station is the Russian power station and they're not going to give this power station to anybody. So everything is very complicated, and obviously if something is going to happen in the Persian Gulf, obviously Ukrainians can take part in this operation with the purpose to take this power station under complete control, because we know that there are tensions between Russians and Ukrainians, not just on the territory of Ukraine, but also for the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And Ukrainians may use this opportunity for the negotiation process to force the Russians to be more flexible on the matter of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And if you remember, the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, also proposed to establish control over the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, that the American side will control this power station, and the American side will split energy between Russians and Ukrainians on the formula of 50-50. So it seems that something like this is going to happen within the next several days, and that is why I believe that most likely the Russians either will evacuate this power station completely, but they can't do this because there is active uranium that if something happens, the entire territory would be polluted. So that is why the Russians can't do this. There are Russian technologies. There are lots of Russians modern power station, nuclear power stations that are under the protection and control of Russians. So basically they can't leave this area. They will try to keep this territory as long as possible in their control, and probably if the situation escalates, most likely they will be forced to deploy their forces and military forces to protect this power station. So the situation is very complicated, and probably this is the reason why the Israelis began bombing and attacking the port infrastructure to the north of Tehran. So today we received lots of updates of how the coalition was attacking the navy forces of Iran in the Caspian Sea. Here we can see how they were attacking ships, vessels, transport ships through the Caspian Sea. Now the Russians have problems with redeployment. If they want to do something like this, they need to have a corridor for these purposes, and probably the Russians were planning to use the Caspian Sea for the transport logistics, but now they will start suffering problems with this. There are a few more options to send humanitarian aid via the state of Azerbaijan or Armenia, but these two states are located very close to Turkey, and most likely they will not allow to do this. So the only and the best solution for Russians was to use the Caspian Sea, but now we see that there are problems with this. We know that currently the state like Tajikistan supports Iran with humanitarian aid according to official data, but military experts are saying that using these trucks and using this humanitarian aid, the Tajikistanians are trying to hide drones that they're sending on the territory of Iran with the purpose to fight with the United States of America and with Israel. So everything is very complicated, and obviously sooner or later it will be impossible to hide details, and we will see everything, and everything will be revealed. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in Ukraine, where the Russians and the Ukrainians continue the conflict. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their positions. We have small changes, so let's discuss them in details. And first, let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. Currently, this is the main direction for both the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Russians are trying to break through Ukraine's defense, and the Russians have already launched their major spring offensive operation. This information was confirmed both by Russians, pro-Russian sources and pro-Ukrainian sources. The Russians are intensifying their activity in this area. They have concentrated huge forces in this region. The Ukrainians are counter-attacking, but it seems that currently the clashes are taking place along the line of combat contact. So within the next several days are going to be very important, because we will understand whether the Russians are able to break through Ukraine's defense and to begin advancing deeper in the direction of the Zaporozhye region, or the Ukrainians would be able to stop the Russians' advance, or at least to slow them down significantly. The Ukrainians, for these purposes, as we discussed during the previous video, are intensifying the mobilization process. Ukraine plans to reduce mobilization deferments and find 1 million draft dodgers. So Ukrainians are planning to mobilize as many as possible soldiers, to train them for 2 or 3 weeks, and then to send them to the line of combat contact, most likely in the Zaporozhye direction, with the purpose to slow down the Russians. So most likely in coming days we'll see lots of clashes in this area, but probably with maybe small progress on the ground. So everything, of course, depends on the technologies, on tactics and commanders and soldiers themselves, but most likely this is going to be the most important battle since the beginning of this conflict, the battle for the Zaporozhye direction. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Period. These are the changes on the ground between the previous 2 days. First, the Russians captured the settlement of Pavlovka. This information was stated yesterday by different sources, and today the Russians improved their positions and answered the settlement of Period from the south. The Russians are keeping advancing further in the northern direction with the purpose to attack the city of Druzhkovka from behind and to encircle the Ukrainians on the territory of the city of Konstantinovka. Meanwhile, the Russians are reducing the city of Konstantinovka to ruins. Since the beginning of the assault, since the beginning of first waves of assault operations on the city of Konstantinovka, the Russians haven't managed to improve their position significantly. Yes, the Russians captured some territories, but all these buildings are located along the city limits, along the border of the city of Konstantinovka, and the assault operation in the city of Konstantinovka started in December of 2025. Currently, we are probably in the late March of 2026, and the Russians are still along the border of the city, and we don't have anything that can confirm that the Russians control 60% of the city of Konstantinovka, as was recently reported by the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov. So that is why the situation is very complicated. The Ukrainians are sending more and more forces in the direction of the southern part of the city with the purpose to stabilize the situation. The Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main logistic lines with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to bring additional forces. So it seems that everything is under control, but from the other side, the Russians are not improving their positions because the Ukrainians are holding the lines. As for the Slaviansk direction, as you can see, we received the biggest number of updates exactly from this area. First of all, the Russians, according to different sources, managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Fedorovka Druga. So these changes were provided by pro-Ukrainian sources. They have adjusted the gray zone, which means that the Russians managed to improve their infiltration areas. At the same time, we received more videos from the settlement of Minkovka. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian source, and here we can see a close combat on the territory of the settlement, which means that Ukrainians have their positions in this area as well, despite the fact that the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Minkovka was captured. So which means that Ukrainians still have possibilities to send their forces in this area, and the Russians from their side have possibilities to attack in the direction of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal and probably to check the Ukraine's defense on the Ukrainian side of this, let's say, water barrier. Furthermore, we received changes by pro-Ukrainian sources in the area of the settlement of Kaleniki. For the first time since the beginning of the battle for this foothold, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that there is an infiltration area in the settlement of Kaleniki itself, and this infiltration area covers not just the settlement of Kaleniki but also this stronghold, which means that there are Russians already there and that the Russians are keeping advancing further in the western direction. So the situation here is very complicated, but we see that despite the Ukraine's resistance, the Russians are moving further in the direction of the city of Slaviansk from the east. As for the Liman and Izum directions, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. As for the Kupiansk direction, here we have the same. Nothing special happened during the previous 24 hours. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, the biggest updates we received from the northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. Here we can see the temporary deployment point that was discovered by Russians, and when they discovered this temporary deployment point, the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory. Furthermore, this evening we start receiving reports that Ukrainians launched another massive wave of drones in the direction of the city of Moscow, and now the Russians are repelling these dozens of drones that are heading towards the capital of the Russian Federation. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.